The United States makes the UN work when it wants it to work. And that is exactly the way it should be, because the only question for the United States is what's in our national interest.
My name is John, and the International Criminal Court is now in session. It is May 12th, 2024. And oh my goodness, a lot of news has happened in the last few days, and you all probably know why by now. So, 3 days ago, Russia celebrated the 79th annual Victory Day, Red Square Parade, where they would march down in downtown Moscow, literally in the center of Red Square itself. How they would have those huge military parades with the tanks and modern vehicles going down the streets, along with their soldiers smiling in broad daylight or in other questionable conditions. But yeah, so they were all going down the street of Red Square, and fortunately the parade was quiet. There was nothing eventful going on. Ukrainians, despite their best efforts, were not able to foil the celebrations. And yeah, everybody supposedly had a good time. And there were no terrorist attacks either. So yeah, Moscow was safe on May 9th, 2024. And then a day later, something happened that I literally did not expect would happen so soon. And here's the thing, I knew it was coming eventually, but I didn't think it would happen this quickly. On May 10th, 2024, Russia launched its long-awaited Kharkiv offensive, or as I'd like to jokingly refer to as the WAOW offensive. So, it is now official. Russia has began the big one. Literally, the storm has officially kicked off. Now, as of right now, it's not a big, hurricane, category, 4 or 5, levels of intensity on the front line right now. I mean, it's getting bad, but it's not quite there yet. But it is developing. But yes, folks, it is official. After 2 years of, preparation, training, and also upping up their production and manpower, the Russian military has returned to Kharkiv Oblast in eastern Ukraine. So, without further ado, let's talk about it. So, on May 10th, they re-entered Kharkiv Oblast, or Kharkov Oblast, and they took a decent amount of villages. Nearly a total of 100 square kilometers. And the Russians so far appear to be advancing from the north towards the south in the outskirts of Kharkiv city in Ukraine. And from what I understand, the Russians' first objective is to take the town of Lipsy, which is, well, not too big. It's like a gateway into this big forested area in Kharkov, which would then put the Russians in position to strike the regional capital itself, or the provincial capital, Kharkov, or Kharkiv. And pardon me if I mix up the Russian and Ukrainian translations of the city's name, because, I don't know, I think they both sound pretty cool, but also I think they literally have a similar, if not a very, identical, I don't know, historical significance to each other. But that's beside the point. Yeah, the Russians are advancing in this area here, and they're also advancing in the vicinity of Volchansk, or Volchansk in Russian. There's a rumor that the Russians have already entered Volchansk, and clashes are ongoing, and there's already speculation on Telegram and on Twitter, aka X, that the Russians have already caused the Ukrainian army to withdraw from Volchansk. Now, if Volchansk falls to Russia, okay, this is hypothetical. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but let's just say it does. Then the Russians will likely reestablish the Kharkov military, like civil military administration, which was like sort of like a governing body to govern the territories of Kharkiv Oblast that were under Russian military control. And so far, the offensive, while slow, I mean, let's be honest, we all knew it was going to be slow as hell. So far, it seems to be going all right, despite what Ukrainian sources have been saying. Now, some have been saying, oh no, shit is going terribly wrong, and they're now begging the United States for more military aid, which cannot possibly come fast enough for them, but as the way I see it, though, I think it's too little too late. Manpower is not as great as it used to be in 2022, in September that year, when they launched their own WAOW offensive against the Russian positions on the left bank Syrvetsky Donets River, in which they easily steamrolled the Russians because they had no manpower to protect them. And so far, it seems like the North Group, which is the army group of Russian soldiers that have been tasked to deal with Kharkiv, seems to have increased significantly in numbers. They went from like 18,000, which was the number of Russians that were in the Kharkov Oblast in 2022, to now around 50 to 100,000 troops, I think. And apparently, I'm even hearing some reports of 200,000 troops, which could be the max total. Though what I am expecting to happen is as soon as they meet up with the guys in this part of Kharkiv, which is on the left bank of the Orskoy River, then basically they're going to combine into like some one large force, because there apparently are 100,000+ Russian troops located in left bank Orskoy River, who will then advance on Kupiansk and perhaps Izium too, and maybe retaking Balaklia, which was where the whole domino effect of the Kharkiv counteroffensive started nearly 2 years ago. But yeah, in this offensive, I don't expect the Russians to take Kharkiv city. I mean, let's be honest. Kharkiv is a huge city, okay? It's a really huge city. Like, at its peak, it had around nearly like 2 million people or so. Nowhere as big as Kiev, but it's pretty big. Like, really big. It's bigger than Donetsk. It's bigger than Lugansk. Bigger than Zaporozhye. Bigger than Dnipropetrovsk, Lvov. I mean, it's bigger than most cities in all of Ukraine. And the only one that it really cannot defeat, obviously, is Kiev. Now, I feel like if the Russians were to get on the outskirts of Kharkov, they're not going to enter the city, but instead they will, like, bypass it. Like, they will, like, go into the outskirts and suburbs of Kharkiv. And then what I think they could do maybe is take Chuligiv, which is this area here. It has a pretty sizable airfield. As you can tell, it looks pretty big for a city that's apparently small. And then, yeah, this is the Syrvetsky Donets River, which basically divides up Kharkiv into like two. Basically, this is the rest of Kharkiv. So this is like around like 60 to 70% of the Oblast that is not separated, or that is on like a completely, I don't know, that has like no like issues whatsoever, like no major barriers like separating it and the rest of the 30% here, which I estimate to be on this is 40%. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong in the comment section, by the way, about this. But yeah, so what I'm expecting to happen is the Russians are going to take Volchansk, and they're probably going to advance further south. And again, as I said, I genuinely believe they're going to make an attempt to reverse the losses they suffered in the 2022 September counteroffensive by the armed forces of Ukraine, which was partly coordinated by NATO themselves. And while the offensive, in retrospective, was quite impressive, some would argue that it was a fluke due to the fact that there were not enough Russians to even up the Ukrainians. So, but now that the Russians appear to have fixed their manpower issues, there's a possibility that if the Ukrainians were to try to do a counteroffensive in this area, it may not work as well as last time, and it may go the same route as the infamous summer 2023 counteroffensive that was attempted in both Donetsk and Zaporozhye Oblast in southern Ukraine, which was where most of them are. And the only part of that front that broke down for the Russians just a little bit was really the Velika Novosilka sector. But even then, the Russians are making headway there, and I won't be shocked if Russia were to overturn all the gains the Ukrainians made last summer. But yeah, so yeah, Russia has launched its long-awaited Big Arrow counteroffensive against the Ukrainians, or again, as I'd like to jokingly say, WAOW offensive. And I'm also hearing reports, now take it with a grain of salt from me personally, I've heard a series of reports on both Twitter and Telegram that the Russians are also going to attack Sumy Oblast as well. Now, to be quite honest, I do think that this is a probable possibility because of the fact that Sumy borders Kharkiv, and the fact is that, like, Sumy is sort of like the back. It's sort of like one of the arms of Kharkiv. So, like, you have Lugansk, Donetsk and Lugansk, like, as your, like, sort of like your pants or, like, arms or something, right? So, like, Lugansk is sort of like, I guess, the left arm, I think, of Kharkiv, and then the right arm would be Sumy. So that would make essentially Donetsk Oblast the pants and Dnipropetrovsk the legs for Kharkiv. But yeah, it's a huge deal, and we'll just see how it develops there. But without further ado, let's go to the other fronts. And then I have some very surprising news that just popped up right before I started recording this video. So, now because of the offensive on Kharkov Oblast by the Russian army, the Ukrainians have started redeploying their troops, especially from Kherson Oblast, which is 70% under the control of Russia. Now, as all of you know by now, Krynki, which is this very tiny fishing village on the left bank of the Dnieper River that's controlled by Russia, has been contested by both the Russians and the Ukrainians for basically an entire year or so. But now that the offensive in Kharkov has started, the Ukrainians are pulling back their resources within Kherson and suspending any operations against Krynki. And obviously this is a huge blow, because this means any operations they did now not only has to come to a halt, but they would be forced to withdraw from the areas that they gained control over. So yeah, Kherson is now officially out of the question for the armed forces of Ukraine. And now, getting to Zaporozhye Oblast. It's been a while since I made a video, so bear with me, okay? So the Russians have gained the upper hand recently in Zaporozhye Oblast over the armed forces of Ukraine, and are now on the brink of restoring what they had lost during last year's counteroffensive, in which in September 2023, the Ukrainians did take control of the city of, the small village/town, Robotine. Now, Robotine was sort of important because it was like one of the major areas that was on the Surovikin line that was like literally highly well defended. And it took around 2 to 3 months for Robotine to fall to Ukraine. But now, as of today's video in May 2024, it appears that Robotine is almost back under Russian control, with literally the majority, around like 60% of the settlement being under the control of the Russians, while the remaining 30 to 40% of it is in a gray zone. But let it be known that the Ukrainians no longer control any part, like, properly of Robotine, and it all seems inevitable that the Russians are going to eventually retake control of the village, which would be a huge unmitigated disaster for Ukraine because, again, it means that their counteroffensive gains in 2023 would have been reversed. And all those guys and all those equipment that were put in there are all gone for literally virtually nothing. And now moving to, speaking of which, the Velika Novosilka sector. Now, this was one of the areas during the counteroffensive last year that actually had some sort of success. The AFU managed to push the Russians out. Sorry about that. I have a lot to speak on my mind, by the way. But the Ukrainians were able to push the Russians out of not just Velika Novosilka, but its outskirts too. So for quite some time, for virtually a whole year, Velika Novosilka has been regarded as safe from any attempted takeover by the Russian army. But now that appears to be changing on the ground as two strategic villages that are south of Velika Novosilka are now under attack by the belligerent Russians. So Stiromaisky and Urazhany are both under attack by Russia right now and are both contested. So Russians right now control a chunk of both of these villages, and it is expected that if both of these were to fall to Russia, it is very likely that the Russians are basically going to force the Ukrainians back to square one in Velika Novosilka, in which Makarivka, Storozheve, and I guess Nyskuchne and Vremivka are all going to fall back to Russia, which would then again put the Russians in position to take Velika Novosilka, which is, even though not too strategic when compared to other parts of the Donetsk Oblast, still, it would be a huge morale blow for the armed forces of Ukraine, who have already been struggling since the fall of Avdiivka, which I would argue was a huge turning point on the front in the Donetsk Oblast and in general the Donbas. So, but yeah, with that being said, let's go to Krasnogorivka. Now, before we get to that, I just want to mention that nothing has gone on in the Ugledar section. It's essentially an operational pause here. So yeah, forget about that area for quite some time. So Krasnogorivka, where do I begin? So in last month's video, in April or so, literally mid-April, I did a part in which literally the Russians had broken into the major town / suburb of Donetsk city known as Krasnogorivka, which was used by the Ukrainians to shell Donetsk city against the Russians. But now, a month later, after the Russians started their offensive on Krasnogorivka, the offensive has gone a lot faster and became more successful than anybody could possibly even think about. The Russians, as of today, especially after a recent assault that was made on the eastern parts of the neighborhood and especially the 2014 front lines, the Russians now control 50% of Krasnogorivka, and the only parts of it that are still under the control of the Ukrainians is the residential areas, and especially the central park here. Now, personally, I think sometime later this month, Krasnogorivka is going to fall to Russia. I repeat, Krasnogorivka is going to fall to Russia. So, and then we got also, just to top it off, Natalyove is about to fall to Russia too. Most of it is under Russian control. Russians are also advancing and are almost about to take the village of Umanske. And also, the offensive on Orcharitine was a lot more successful than anybody could possibly imagine. And now the Russians not only have control of it, but they now control over the high ground areas that Orcharitine was sitting atop on. So now the Russians are in very good position to launch offensives in multiple directions. Rather it be towards Nauyork and Toretsk, Konstantinivka, or even Pokrovsk, if they're that crazy enough to do it, which would effectively give Russians a gateway to Dnipropetrovsk Oblast in literally southern Ukraine. So yeah, big deal. And last but not least, Chasiv Yar, the Russians now control most of the forested areas just outside of Chasiv Yar, and the Russians, after withdrawing from Chasiv Yar for a while, have now re-entered the town's micro-district, like Canal micro-district, and it's looking more and more likely that this part's going to fall, especially now with the Kharkiv offensive ongoing. So that's going to literally force the Ukrainians to redeploy a lot of their forces over from literally this area up to Kharkiv, because Kharkiv is obviously more important than any of this, right? But yeah, so that's going to be the update for today, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the video and found it informative. Let me know what you all think in the comment section below, what you think of basically the situation right now, and I'll see you all next time. Happy Mother's Day, and stay safe. Have a good one. Hey guys, I just want to mention that not long after the recording of this video, I just received reports that Russian Minister of Defense Sergei Shoigu has been replaced by Andrei Bulusov, who, unlike Shoigu, never served in the Russian military ever. He is an economist who graduated at Moscow State University in 1981. And, yeah, so apparently Shoigu has been replaced, and he's now taking the place of another Russian cabinet member. I think it's, like, has something to do with, like, the Security Council within Russia itself. So you can make the argument that Shoigu is being promoted from the Ministry of Defense to the Security Council of Russia. And for those of you who don't know, Nikolai Patrushev, who has been the Secretary of the Security Council of Russia, has been in office since 2008, and I guess he felt, well, I'm getting old. He's 72 years old, so I guess he felt like it was his time to go. So, yeah, he basically retired or something from office, and now Shoigu is taking his place. So, I don't know how this is going to affect the war on Ukraine, though I will say that it is pretty significant since Shoigu was in the position that he's been in since literally 2008, along with, Patrushev. So, yeah, once again, Shoigu has been replaced, and, yeah, it's going to be Andrei Bulusov. So, yeah, for real this time, everybody, have a great day and stay safe.